What makes you say he's right-wing?
Tommy Robinson? Really?
If it's that obvious,
Yeah.
it gets a really from you, then I want to know what. Just give me some of the obvious answers.
The way that he's spoken about.
Nationalism's often a lefty cause.
Christian nationalism isn't. There are people with legitimate grievances and concerns that shouldn't be unfairly labelled as racist.
Such as Tommy.
I don't think that. Loads of people are saying it's your fault Charlie is dead because I said that his rhetoric was extremely harmful and that I strongly disagreed with him. George Floyd, a video of him being murdered by a police officer was widely circulated around the internet.
I mean, there are nutters and trolls online, but the kind of people celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, we're talking about the Oxford president. We're relying totally on culture as the differences, right?
Geography, empire, history, socioeconomic status that I don't think we should discount.
No, okay, not discounted. If it's in all 52 countries, does that not suggest it has something to do with the culture of that religion?
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
We now have millions of people in this country who actively hate Jews because of their culture. Can you understand why a Jewish family might say, screw that, I don't want these people in this country right now because many, many, many of them want me dead?
Yeah, of course I do.
I'm thinking in 5 years, you're going to be on our side.
A lot of people tell me that.
I know it's annoying when creators ask you to subscribe, but since I started, the channel's grown 10 times faster. If you don't sub, YouTube probably won't show you the next episode. It's free and takes 2 seconds. Hit subscribe. Tell me, just for people who don't know who you are yet, what's going on?
So I'm a Cambridge student. I study politics. I'm in my 3rd year now, and I kind of appeared online and gained some visibility after I debated with Charlie Kirk, and then since then I've gone on to debate some more and talk about politics online.
Are you like a debater? Have you done debating?
So yes, I feel like debate gets a bad rap, so I don't want to say I'm like one of those. But since I was about 17, I started competitively debating with, not necessarily with my school. My school didn't have any debate programs because it was a state school. We didn't do that sort of thing, but I got in touch with a debate coach in my own spare time on Twitter and asked him to coach me at a discount because I'd accidentally made it to the finals of a competition and I was self-taught and I was like, I have to, get some coaching in, and then it kind of started from there. So I've competitively debated like formally at the schools level and a little bit at university too, but I much prefer engaging in politics like this.
Yeah, because I suppose the debate thing is often it's not who's right or wrong, it's who's better at debating. What's like a couple of things? I've never looked into how to do it or anything. A couple of things that you could arm me with, because we're going to disagree with a couple of things, I think, and agree with other things. What's a couple of things that someone who's never debated before should know to do?
That's a great question. I think probably they should always think about how things materially look in the real world, so how something manifests itself. Sometimes I think people get too obsessed with abstract ideas and I don't know. Sometimes the left also gets accusations of this, right? Like we're too lofty and we don't think about the real world. I think as someone who is on this side of the political spectrum, I would wholly disagree with that. And the way that I go about disagreeing with that is demonstrating how left-wing ideals look in reality. So I suppose if you want to engage in some kind of discussion with me, like I would say we should meet at that level maybe.
Real world, keep it real.
Keep it real.
Keep it real. Okay, that's interesting. And then is there like a sneaky tactic to win though? Or do people now realise that, hang on, no, you've strawmanned someone or something like that?
I think that if I were to say there is a sneaky tactic, it would be just making sure that someone agrees with you right until the end. So I do this a lot with people, especially when it comes to things like the monarchy. It's quite easy, where you get people to agree on what a good institution looks like, what do states look like, how does politics, like what would the ideal political situation look like, and then we go through all of these points, and then at the end I say, and this is why I'm a Republican, I'm not a monarchist, and so it's more difficult, I think, to argue with someone who you wholeheartedly agree with most of the time, and then you just hate their conclusion.
So if I wanted to argue against immigration, so I would start with, isn't it annoying how the Brits go to Spain, don't learn the language, don't mix with people, and so on, and people will probably agree with that. And then I say, well, when it happens here, it's also not good then. Would that be a way?
That would be a way, yes.
But then I'm sure there'd be a million arguments back, of course.
There would be counterpoints, yes.
Okay. So the Charlie Kirk By the way, that wasn't point scoring. I was just trying to think of an example. I don't even know your views on immigration. What was it like? I mean, you must have been nervous. No, how old were you?
It was, how long ago was it now? Maybe 6 months ago. So I was still 19.
Bloody hell. Okay, how are you? I mean, you must have been. I would have been petrified.
Not really. I think what I always a little bit of context is the Cambridge Union, we get a bunch of guests in all the time. I say we, I just attend the events. Like, I'm just a member of the Cambridge Union. And so oftentimes I'll sit in the audience and every so often I'll make a speech at the union, that kind of thing. So there's been a few times where some really big and famous guests have come to the union and I've met them, and I'm not going to name names because I think that's rude, but almost always when you meet someone in person, they are about half as compelling as they are online. So, I mean, there are a couple of exceptions to this.
I thought you were going to say much nicer and more well-rounded than they are.
I mean, they seem much nicer and well-rounded, yes. But in terms of how apt you feel at the time to deconstruct their worldview, that's what I mean. So I don't necessarily mean like, oh, they bore me to death, or I don't like them as people, or they're not charismatic. What I mean is like, it's much easier to deconstruct somebody's worldview when they're standing in front of you. That's what I always find. Like, rather than, you know, when you watch people like so-and-so roasts and destroys someone online and it's a clip, it's, you know...
Yeah, but you're still getting up in front of like loads of people, super clever Cambridge people, and having to debate someone who's been doing this for decades.
Yeah, I think part of the reason why I was a little bit nervous going into it, I didn't want to speak first because I didn't know what the rules would be. At first, what it was going to be was like the official tagline was, oh, you're gonna have a debate with him. You're gonna ask him a question. He's gonna respond, and you'll get the right of reply once. And obviously that's not how it ended up manifesting. It ended up as a 10-minute back and forth with each student because Charlie didn't necessarily, he just wanted to have the debate. The students did as well. Like, we felt that it was a really important moment where we could challenge someone's ideas in a formalized setting at a fantastic institution, right? So I didn't want to speak first. I was a bit nervous about that. But the atmosphere there, I think, like, I'll never forget it. I remember feeling a little bit vindicated when Charlie's not surrounded by his usual Christian nationalist crowd at like some uni in the Bible Belt or whatever. And instead, he's got a very different audience, a British audience to start with, who are much more secular, and that does play into it. So, for example, when he was saying, the Civil Rights Act was a huge mistake, and a whole bunch of people kind of burst out laughing. And it wasn't it wasn't one of those things where everyone's cheering and everyone's really excited to see him. They're more excited to watch the debates. So it was just a different atmosphere. Like, I think I would have been much more nervous if I was surrounded by Texans who were like, MAGA and that kind of thing.
Maybe that would have been more fun, though, in some
Potentially,
ways.
in a way, yeah.
All right, let's stop a second. I know a lot of you are worried about an Islamic takeover of the West. I went to the cradle of Western civilization. I went to Nazareth, where Judeo-Christian values started, to find an Islamist mafia.
The example of what we see in Nazareth, it is what is coming for the UK. It is what is coming for America. His religion, you can't steal, you can't kill.
But what do you think about Hamas?
I have never seen it like this before. I'm actually kind of shocked.
Looks like Birmingham. Which you can find on my new investigations channel, linked below. Go to it, please subscribe, like, watch it through, because people need to learn about what is happening to our world. Okay, you can keep watching this now. So what was he, did you get any time outside of that with him?
No, not at all. This is also an unusual thing, which was the moment that the last person spoke, he walked out, got in the car, filmed a TikTok and posted it. Like, he was immediately like out of Cambridge. Maybe he had an event next, like he was a busy person, right?
Okay. You got in trouble, I believe, for your reaction, and not in the way some people might expect, to his death. What was that about? So,
I suppose this is the first time that I've spoken about this outside of a short video that I made where I was saying I was going to get I don't know how it's happened now, but at the time he was the president-elect of the Oxford Union. His name was George. Mm-hmm. He made some comments that were widely regarded, especially on the right, as distasteful about Charlie's death. And I wanted to get him on my podcast because we actually have quite a few agreements. But obviously, before your commenters jump at me, I posted a video seconds after watching the shooting, not in person, but on a video that was since scrubbed from the internet completely. It was full HD. I watched the snuff film of a man I met, basically, and I also previously, before watching the video, I received about a dozen messages from people telling me that this was my fault and that I was to blame for his death because I said that his rhetoric was extremely harmful and that I strongly disagreed with him and that he was a Christian nationalist and all kinds of things. That's what I said, and I stand by all of the things I said about him. And anyways, so that's how I find out. I think what's going on, loads of people are saying it's your fault, Charlie is dead. And obviously I check Twitter and I think, what's going on in politics? What are politicians saying? Because I hadn't even checked the news yet at this point. And the first thing that comes up when I open Twitter is the video. And I suppose some context about me is I'm really not in the business of watching violent videos online. So I know there's a lot of people who watched the conflict. I consider it what is to be a genocide in Palestine. You might have your disagreements, but watch that happen online for hours every single day, and they've become quite desensitized to what violence looks like. And I would too. It's a human thing for people to become desensitized to violence if you watch it all the time. But for me, there was one video that I saw of what was going on in Palestine, and that was enough because I felt it's much more important for me not to disable my ability to act in the way that I feel is best, which is mostly behind the scenes, but I do speak publicly as well. I'm currently in contact quite regularly with a doctor who goes into Gaza, and he wants the kids there to receive the healthcare that any kid deserves. And I'm trying my best with the skill set that I have, which is in debate and oratory skill and stuff, to help him. Even though it's not necessarily the most practical. So that's some context about me, which is I'm really sensitive to violence, gore, etc.
Mm-hmm. As am I. I'm the same as you.
Yes, I don't watch it. I don't engage with it. When I was a kid and the news would come on, I would get so upset. I was in a taxi when I was about 5 or 6, and there was the radio was playing, and my mum was asked the taxi driver to turn the radio off because I remember the news. It was that 2 people had been stabbed in Manchester, and I couldn't deal with it. That 2 people had been stabbed, and I was just like hysterically crying about it as a kid. And my mum had to literally wean me onto the news so that I could live in the real world and be a functioning human being, like as a child. So that's the context. And then obviously there was that whole thing of people were saying it was my fault. I felt like immediately I started making these political predictions. I was like, we're going to see a clampdown on free speech, what people can and can't say about Charlie Kirk, what is the acceptable reaction, what people should have said about him while he was alive that they didn't. So I felt immediately I'm in the firing line. Because I engaged in a debate with him. Already I have dozens of people telling me it's my fault and that I should, rescind and retract the language that I used while he was alive. So my head's in a whole state. And so I'm sat with my family at the time. My 2-year-old sister's in the living room. A day earlier, I'd filed a police report for a death and a rape threat. And the policeman knew who I was. And he told me that I was trying to get someone arrested for their free speech. And I had to make the case as to why it was illegal for someone to send me a death and a rape threat. Yeah. So obviously, this is extremely difficult. Thank you. And this is all an extremely difficult situation. I feel it's so embroiled in personal circumstances that at the time, it was beyond politics. It was beyond optics. All I wanted to do was I was looking at my sister. I was looking at the violent messages I was receiving. I'd just seen that violent video. I immediately started fearing about politics in the States and how that might bleed into domestic politics here in the UK, because unfortunately it does. Yeah. And I just thought, this is awful, right? This is just terrible, regardless of what you think about Charlie and who he was. This particular act, and I'm not even blanketly a pacifist, this particular act was not good. And anyways, so I post this video and I'm very upset and I'm crying, and I express that I'm terrified for politics and I'm really scared of violence. And that's not to kind of put a moral judgment on whether or not violence is even okay. It's just objectively true that violence is very scary and people think they're ready for it and they're not. And so, I mean, I've rambled on about it, but that's where I was. That was the situation I was in. And so now what I want to do is encourage people to, to organize for good causes, to ensure that they recognize that there is a broader argument to be had here, rather than, should you or should you not empathize with Charlie Kirk? I feel like I'm quite uninterested in talking about that, because at the end of the day, this is an event that occurred in global politics, and most people had never met this individual. And so they get to feel however they want about it. You know,
So that George guy you mentioned before, the Oxford Union president, was he George?
Yeah.
Abadaonye. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. So he said, "Let's effing go!" Like sort of excited celebration of the shooting of Charlie Kirk. And you put out something that I think was the opposite of that in many respects. Of like, "Hey, this isn't good. What's happened to Charlie?" And you got, to an extent, attacked by your own side for that.
I did.
What does that say to you about some parts of that's, should we say, progressive side?
I understood it. Most people have not met him. It's a completely different experience to watch a video of someone dying if your palms have touched, right? It's a totally different experience. And most people, they don't understand it because it's an incredibly unique situation to meet someone who you, for all intents and purposes, really thoroughly dislike in pretty much every way, debate that person, stand in front of them, shake hands, and then watch them die. It's a totally unique situation. Most people can't say they've ever been in it, especially when all they know of Charlie is he's hugely responsible for the uptick in conservative politics among young people in the States and across the world, including, South Korea, across East Asia. He was like a hugely influential person. Many people believed it was for totally the wrong reasons, right? He was largely in part responsible for what happened with even Roe v. Wade. He bussed people to the Capitol insurrection. He has celebrated and advocated himself for the public execution of individuals who've committed crimes. So, and he's also someone whose rhetoric about gun violence was regressive and bad.
In your opinion,
yeah.
And I don't know where I stand on guns and things as well. But still, we're at a point in society where he, a family man, a man with kids, and a man who I imagine meant well. Like everybody's, the worst people in the world have meant well, the best people have meant well. Everybody, I think, means well, apart from the occasional psychopath. And I doubt Charlie was one of them. And all you did was say, "Come on, guys, shooting someone in the throat is not good." People went crazy at you on the progressive side, and you say you can understand that. Does that not suggest that there is a kind of acceptable clamour for violence in progressive circles, which is what I think a lot of people like me are particularly concerned about?
Mm-hmm. I understand the concern. I genuinely do get it. I think that when I examine evidence of conservative violence, what I see is an overwhelming majority over here. So even though, for example, you'll see your surveys among young people who talk about political violence, and if you're on the left, you're more likely to say that political violence in some circumstances is okay. I don't think this particular act was okay.
Of course.
But for example, we had a revolution in Nepal recently. The government introduced some of the most serious crackdowns on social media that the country had ever seen. Nepal is impoverished and it's experienced extreme hardship. Young people, Gen Z kids, weren't having it. This is like obviously an extreme simplification, but they essentially overthrew the authoritarian government that had been in power, and people died in that process. They set fire to the Houses of Parliament. The Nepalese citizens set fire to the Houses of Parliament, and I believe there was a woman in there at the time, and she died. She burned to death, and she died, and she had children, and it's awful. And at the exact same time, I can hold this belief. I can equally say, who am I to tell the Nepalese that they weren't allowed to have that revolution, right?
But hang on, there's a difference between overthrowing a government and shooting a man who's not a politician. Not that you should shoot politicians either in the throat.
No, 100%. I think the point that I'm trying to make is essentially that when you feel worried about lefties or left-wing people who express that they think political violence is at times okay, I would even be inclined to I would be inclined to agree with them in some circumstances. I disagreed with them on this.
I mean, look, I agree with you.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most sensible people would agree sometimes you have to reach for violence in certain circumstances. I think we're on different sides of the aisle on Israel, for example, but Israel would be a prime example on my, and then you could, so I'm not looking to, as a sort of cheap shot, look, you're fine with violence kind of thing, because that's
because I'm
nonsense.
obviously not.
Well, no, and neither am I, and yet you know, the amount of people screaming that I love genocide, which is just like as if I would love, you know, obviously I think it's a different thing to what they think is the thing, but they can't seem to, you know, they'd rather just say I'm a genocide. And so equally, I wouldn't think that you want, you know, you enjoy violence. I can see you actually abhor violence. But as you said yourself, a lot of people on the left are more willing to go towards violence. And the reaction you got, just as a sensible, I mean, imagine if something like that had happened to somebody, you know, Jeremy Corbyn or someone who I would see as a political enemy, or what's his name, the Scottish, I forgot his name right now, the Scottish guy who was on Big Brother talking to a cat or something. These are people who are as much my political adversaries as they can get. Yes. And if someone killed them, I'd be as you were, I'd be horrified. And if I put out a video saying as much, I think I would like to think that the centre right would agree. Gosh, you can't be shooting George Galloway. You can't, you know. So there does seem to be this issue. I mean, can you understand why there are concerns from people who are, say, in the centre right about this sort of young leftist feeling of you can do anything to your enemies? Like
I say, I do understand. I think, firstly, if you examine material reality, what you see is that conservatives, obviously extremist conservatives, are more likely to commit violence than extremist left-wing individuals. I also would point out that conservatives themselves have expressed similarly distasteful views about the deaths of people that they dislike. One of whom that springs to mind would be George Floyd. A video of him dying, a video of him being murdered by a police officer was widely circulated around the internet, and right-wingers, many of them, obviously not to generalise, many of them thought it's atrocious, because it is.
Well, the vast majority, I would say.
I don't know if you're on the side of the internet with the George Floyd memes and all kinds of things.
So we might be talking about the Groypers or something, but anybody I know in the sort of centre right, I'd be appalled if anybody celebrated his death. And I mean, there are nutters and trolls online, but the kind of people celebrating Charlie Kirk's death, we're talking about the Oxford president, the Oxford debate, what was he? The
debate club.
Debate club president. These are very mainstream people. This is a guy at the centre of the culture wars. If somebody at the centre, at the heart of the culture wars on the centre right or the right was celebrating George Floyd's death, I mean, and not to mention, I mean, the violence. So after Charlie Kirk's death, I didn't see anything. There might have been, you know, I'm sure there were.
There were white nationalist, white power uprisings across the country after Charlie Kirk died.
See, I didn't hear about that, but I appreciate that. That's new information to me. But compared to what we saw after George Floyd's death, like we're talking about months and months, years really, of Antifa violence.
I suppose what I will say about the Black Lives Matter, I didn't intend to come on the podcast and talk about Black Lives Matter because, I mean, at the time I was 15. So I had only just started engaging with politics. So genuinely do forgive me that if some of these facts are wrong. But from the evidence that was circulated following a series of protests that occurred during what was the civil rights movement, essentially 2020, it was, I think, generally accepted that over 90-something% of the protests never involved any violence, and many of the protests began with police brutality. So I think a good cross-comparison that we might make is the Sarah Everard Vigils. I don't know if you're familiar with them.
This was the woman who was murdered by police?
She was murdered by a policeman. It was, I mean, horrific. People held, mostly older women, held a vigil for her following her death. And violence broke out because police officers were handling these women with a level of care that, I mean, it was profoundly unacceptable. Like, there were photos of women in their 70s and 80s with like a knee on their neck and their hands behind their back, and they were faces pushed into the ground, and they were hit with, you know, the police batons. It was awful. I mean, I think that obviously I wasn't there during the Black Lives Matter movement. I was all the way over in the UK, being 15. But at the same time, from the evidence that I saw, most of the protests were peaceful. Of the protests that weren't peaceful, many began with police violence itself. And of the ones that were violent, they were widely disavowed by people within the Black Lives Matter movement themselves.
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement itself is accused of all sorts of misdemeanors and crimes and embezzlements and things like that. I mean, it's it frustrated me as somebody who was vehemently opposed to it, that we were made by our culture to, embrace and support that and wear Black Lives Matter on the back of like football shirts and things like that. It does feel like the left is able to penetrate, at least in the UK, at the mainstream in a way that the right is not. And so that when, well, you know what, that doesn't, let's move on actually, okay. I think. And you make some interesting points. I wonder, why do you think that as people get older, they tend to move further to the right?
Oh, okay. Interesting question. I suppose this is a good one, because I have thought about this. I think it's partly, I mean, I'm purely like, I'm making educated guesses. I don't know the answer to this, but I would argue it potentially might be in part due to the way in which like progressive movements themselves tend to shift the Overton window to some extent. So like when you have the hippies during the 1960s, they grow up and they get older and they may have retained some of their kind of hippie views, but largely they were also a product of the environment of the 1960s at the same time. Maybe it's something to do with that. Oftentimes I think I hear from the right, like, oh, we stop paying taxes and then we become right wing. And I hear that a little bit to some extent as well. I don't have an answer for you. Like my honesty is I don't have an answer. I'm
not sure there is one.
Yeah, that there might not be.
It's an interesting thing to think about.
It is, yeah.
See, I thought when I was your age, fucking hell. When I was your age, I thought that older people just become a bit more selfish. I thought like, and I had nothing to, and you didn't say that, of course, but I had nothing to go off. It was just this feeling of us and them, and I was the us being a young person, and them were the older people, and I just thought, gosh, they must just become selfish. And one thing I felt as I've gotten older is I feel much less selfish. I feel much more less concerned about looking good to people. I think when I was 20, I was selfish because I was just maybe going along with the things other people said, because I knew it got me popularity. I didn't know I was doing that. It was subconscious, but I thought this will get me popularity. People will like me. I'm saying the right things. I'm not rocking the boat. And as you get older, you go, you know what? If people don't like me, fine. But unfortunately, this is more complicated than we might think. And so we've got to deal with, as you say, material reality. And there's the accusation thrown at the left often is that they live in this kind of utopian world. I suppose the left and the right, I'm just thinking out loud here. There's to me, there's a gap in the left wanting to perfect humanity. I mean, you alluded to this kind of progressiveness, and they keep making it more and more progressive, right? And some people get left behind, or they're still a product of their environment where they were 30 years previous. But society should move on and continue progressing and progressing and progressing. But we also know from history, I think, whenever there's been a terrible, terrible dictatorship or authoritarian regime, it seems to have come from an idea of overriding the fact that we are human and trying to make us perfect, forgetting that we're real people. And that I feel is at the crux of the debate you had with Charlie Kirk, for example, about feminism. So I would probably describe myself, or at least I would have maybe a few months ago. I'm sort of trying to think out loud about these things all the time, as the same as you, as a feminist, certainly in individual liberty and into all of those things. And so any daughter of mine, any woman I know, or whatever, should have exactly the same rights and the same opportunities as me. What do we do if it turns out we're wrong? What do we do if these are lovely ideas for freedom and individual liberty, but they actually make for a society that destroys itself? So let's say, just completely for the sake of argument, that Charlie was right and that we are a healthier society when women are not afforded the kind of individual rights they're given now. What would we do about that? Does that make sense as a question?
It does. I suppose what you might be asking is, am I willing to accept that I might be wrong? And in those circumstances, how would I react, right? Because there are accusations levied towards people who sit on the left that they ardently refuse to admit that they ever could be wrong. And I think one of the reasons as to why we do often refuse that is on the basis that I think we are more aligned with objectivity. And so it was interesting that you brought up dictatorships and the idea of wanting to perfect human capacity and stuff. And we do see this in especially like fascism and under Hitler we saw the perfection of the Aryan blood and that kind of thing.
Übermensch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And you had the like Jewish blood was corrupt in the Aryan race and this sort of thing. So I totally agree with you in that capacity. I think that one of the other things that fascism or authoritarianism tends to pursue is engaging in a really sensual experience of what it means to live in a nation or in a society without much thought for factual evidence-based claims. And I mean, this is only partly true. So one reason I say this is partly true is because in Nazi Germany, the reason as to why people are like so swept up by the ideas of the Nazi Party is because you have eugenicists at the time and prominent academics and thinkers who were at the forefront of the cutting edge of science, who were making these like racist, social, Darwinist, pseudoscientific claims.
They were wrong.
They were wrong.
But they swept everybody up into this kind of mania.
Into a
look,
frenzy.
I'm not going to. I know I'm having to go at the left. I'm not going to sit here and defend fascism and the Nazis either. So we can agree. And I'm Jewish as well. So I totally agree on that. And I suppose that I guess that's how I feel about. In that moment, they all thought this was great, and
yes,
I'm going to use the word progressive, but not progressive in the lefty sense, but progress for society. We're moving on, and anybody swept is behind this isn't behind us with our new science is a monster who doesn't want to help us and help the cause. And I'm glad you agree with that, because a lot of people don't agree, and it winds me up that they think, no, the Nazis were just all evil, and it's just mad.
No, they weren't.
No,
I read a great book. It's a really famous book, The Banality of Evil by Hannah Arendt. Like, she talks about how most people themselves didn't view themselves as evil, and many people behind like the machinery of the Holocaust didn't necessarily directly contribute themselves, and it was all like it was like a bureaucratic process. And that is something that is really dangerous about modernity, full stop, which is that it turns these like human experiences into bureaucratic processes during which like your division of labor is split and split and split, and suddenly no one is individually responsible for anything anymore.
That's it. That's exactly it. And those who are responsible, I mean, a lot of people were so excited they were behind this. I don't think they knew the true horrors of what was happening in the concentration camps, but they got really behind this kind of pseudo-scientific idea of a new Germany. There was a lot of, the economy was in a mess, so people were really desperate to cling on to something. And I suppose I see that the economy is being a bit of a mess today. And I guess the most similar thing to like that kind of pseudoscience, people thinking this is really progress, as the Nazis might have, would be trans, for example. This idea men can be women, women can be men, without any, as far as I'm concerned, scientific evidence. I mean, there's pseudoscience that the Nazis had with eugenics. In the same way, everyone's behind it. If you're against it, you're out, you're bad. You're J.K. Rowling, constantly called a Nazi. She's the worst person ever, just for questioning it. Those are the kinds of issues that I worry about on the left. They go full throttle for something that is just I don't know. I'm interested in what you have to say about it, because perhaps you'll say there is a scientific founding or something.
I suppose, as a feminist myself, and as someone who doesn't sit on this side of the aisle at all, in terms of trans issues, like I would describe, firstly, gender as the political interpretation of sex. And so,
why?
Why?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose you describe yourself as a feminist.
Yeah.
What do you think that patriarchy exists?
Yeah, and I think I don't want to go off too much from because I want you to stay on this.
No, I'll stay on it. Don't worry.
But I think that's the question I wanted to ask before. Really, was do we sometimes have to be illiberal to continue our liberalism? And what I mean is, I see myself as feminist. What if feminism's actually destroying us? And then maybe it's good there's a patriarchy. I don't know. I'm playing with the thought right now. And then how do I handle that? But go on.
I suppose the question I'll ask you is, what do you understand the patriarchy to mean?
Well, I suppose it could mean, I suppose that at its most basic, is it just men kind of rule society?
Yeah, and how would men go about ruling society? What would they have to establish? Like, what kind of norms and cultural presuppositions and even legislative, like thrust of legislature would they have to establish?
Well, it couldn't be in our society an absolutist patriarchy, then, could it? Because we can have a female prime minister and things like that,
exactly,
right? So
yes.
It wouldn't be an absolutist. But I suppose the argument for those saying there is a patriarchy would be that there are some aspects where men have advantages, such as maybe we don't have good enough birth control or for men, and the women are expected to do it, or we don't have enough sort of pay for women. We don't have good enough maternity leave or incentives for women to have children and still have the job and those kinds of things. And so there is an advantage for men in that sense. So you could argue there's a slight patriarchy in that sense.
Sure. So would you say that there are also cultural ideas about womanhood that we uphold so that we can ensure that these things continue to happen?
I suppose so. I feel like you're going to say that, so there is an idea of what womanhood is, and so men can appropriate that. Is that where you're going? No. Okay, well then I'll just answer. There are ideas about women. Again, Judith Butler would say that those are completely manufactured by society, but she can't write for shit, and she's mental, in my opinion. And I think you'd look at societies throughout history and you see those patterns emerge again and again and again and again, which would hint at it being biological.
Yeah, for about 2,000 years, yeah.
What was it like hundreds of thousands of years ago?
So I've done a bit of biological anthropology over the course of my degree, and much of it as personal study, because my degree is mainly social anthropology alongside the politics and things like that. But I became very much interested in biological anthropology because I wanted to answer these questions, like, why is it that patriarchy exists? And is patriarchy a natural thing? Like, would we have to suppress our biological urges in order to get rid of the patriarchy? And if so, would that damage us? Would that destroy us? And the conclusion that I came to was that patriarchy isn't natural. And the reason for that is because we can cite the beginning of patriarchy alongside certain other political phenomena that arise at the same time, like currency, agriculture, etc. Also, the Paleolithic era, i.e. basically the Stone Age, women and men ultimately occupy incredibly similar roles. And you have, so you do have a bit of the older science that lags behind a bit and says that men were hunting and women were gathering, this type of thing. It was more of, nowadays we see it as more of a 60-40 split, for example. So men are a bit more likely to hunt and women are a bit more likely to gather. But ultimately there was oftentimes like pretty even, like hunting and stuff like that. And so this is not to say, there are no biological differences between us at all. Like, sex is a biological reality that exists and is real. But at the same
controversial
time,
in itself to say.
I don't believe it is. I don't believe. I've never expressed that sex is a biological reality.
But you haven't.
And experienced controversy off the back of it. And I've been, I've had friends who are non-binary and trans, and I've said this to them, and they've said, "Yeah, of course."
Okay.
Like, this is obviously.
I've had it sort of shouted at me, but it might be the extreme end of the sort of progressive. It might not be the sort of core.
Yeah, I think maybe what I'm getting at is basically gender as the political interpretation of sex means that in an ideal world, many feminists would say, we don't really want to engage with gender at all, because these are all of the ways in which like society creates oppressive cultural norms so that women feel as though they have to participate in patriarchy too. Right? Because, I think it's totally unfair to say men solely cause patriarchy. Women buy into patriarchy, and that's why it continues also.
Maybe they like it.
Some women do like it. There are many like elements of patriarchy that women enjoy. And I'm not going to shy away from saying that. And I think one of the reasons why they do so is because it allows them to engage with this political interpretation of sex that is gender. And so this is why I say that I don't really buy much into all of the moral panic surrounding trans people, because I do think that gender, if you look at the world, and if you realize that sex isn't really relevant to very much beyond your physical anatomy and your physical body, then you see gender everywhere. Even though in an ideal world I wouldn't want it to exist, I still think that medically there are a very small number of people in society, I think something 0.71% of people who would benefit from medical transition.
But even if that were the case, so I personally don't buy into this idea that gender is separate from sex. I think these were just two words. I think gender the etymology was started to become used a little bit more because people didn't want to say the word sex, right?
Okay.
That's how it started. And then people recently have started saying, no, it's a political thing. It's how people are perceived. And okay, so then, but wouldn't that then fit into a kind of appropriation? If we agree that then, okay, it's a patriarchy and women are oppressed and that's part of their political gender, for men who have all the advantages in that sort of those definitions. Men who have all those advantages to then just say, well, I'm just going to identify into that. Similarly, and I know you'll have heard this argument before, if we agree that in some ways black people might be oppressed or who knows what, it would be horrific for white people to start going around going, yeah, I actually identify as black people because I identify as oppressed. Why is it okay for men to say, I identify as woman? And I mean not women as the sex. I'm talking about the oppressed gender
political
politics.
class, right?
Yeah.
Why is it okay for someone who is a male person to identify with an oppressed political class when they could spend their entire life unburdened by those anchors, right?
Well, they are unburdened by them, because anything that does affect women politically and you would argue is because they are women. It's not because they act a certain way and like la-di-da and have...
No, I think partly it is. I think like depending on how you present in society, you are treated differently, and most people would widely agree with this.
So women who are quite blokey
are treated differently from women who are ultra feminine.
And
of
then
course.
would you say that they don't suffer from the same kind of misogyny?
No, they would suffer from certain sex-based, like misogynistic attitudes and all kinds of things along those lines.
Well, one of those misogynist attitudes is the idea that women should have long hair and long nails and things like that. Which is why so many people think the whole trans thing is a misogynist.
Yeah, I think like I suppose there are two different responses to this type of argument. The first one is like race is also something that is determined by how people see you and perceive you, and depending on where in the world you go, you are reinterpreted and treated differently depending on what your race is. So like you have the one drop rule in the States, which is if you have literally one drop of quote black blood, then you're seen as black and recognized as black by people in the States. So this comes from like segregation, that kind of stuff. Like you have recently there was a woman who was elected a black woman who was elected as some governor in the United States, and I saw a picture of her, and I saw a white woman. Yeah. I saw someone who was a white lady.
This is a problem with Meghan Markle, because I assumed she was white.
Right.
I had no idea. And so did that guy, I forgot his name right now, who came out and he did a picture of like the royal family with a monkey or something. And he had no idea she was black. And then it became a race thing. And he'd never said anything racist before. He was a bit of a lefty, and he got like fired, kicked out, everything happened to him.
Well, the point is, depending on where you are in the world, Meghan Markle might be white.
Well, race is subjective, isn't it?
Exactly, race is totally
as opposed
subjective.
To sex.
As opposed to sex, yeah. But this, you can say the same thing about like your skin color is an objective reality that we all look at and observe. But how people label you based on that, and how people understand you and perceive you on the basis of those traits that you biologically express, are totally dependent on where you are in the world, what stereotypes already exist, how race has been like perceived. So Latin America is like totally on the inverse of this, where you have you've lived in Latin America. Am I right?
Yes, yeah.
So you don't need me to explain how race will be understood differently in Argentina versus the United States.
Yeah, well, they'll also be able to joke about race over there, which we can't do here anymore. And
I don't buy it.
I think it's healthier.
I have many friends, and we all have a laugh with each other. Right?
Oh, what do you mean? You're suggesting that you can joke about people's race today in like the public sphere? Maybe your friends.
I don't know. I see comedians all the time.
There's a footballer from Uruguay, speaking of Latin America, called Rodrigo Bentancur, who joked in the summer holiday. Someone asked him about a player called Heung-min Son, who was South Korean, and he said, yes, I was with him, or maybe it was one of his cousins, I don't know. That's a joke about someone's race. It's offensive. It's not a nice thing to say. I wouldn't make a joke like that. He was absolutely vilified in the UK and was banned for 8 games. Now, people who break someone's leg get banned for 3 games. So the idea that we can still joke about things, okay, maybe he could have had a fine or he could have been told off, that kind of thing shows that you can see this just in tracing the history of swear words. You can look at where our society, I think, has become a bit religious and treats certain aspects as sacrosanct. And so you can see how initially words like hell and damn were the worst words you could say, because that was religion. And so religion, or don't you dare say anything about religion, that moved on to the body, fuck and shit. So the words I can say, I worry about YouTube, but I can just about get away with saying them once or twice. We shouldn't continue it too much. And then we moved in the last 20, 30 years to identity, right? So that is, to me, it just seems arbitrary. And 20, 30 years down the line, it will be something else. And we'll look back and go, gosh, we really, because those are what you wouldn't say the N word. You wouldn't say the F word for gay people. The only word that survived the body stuff was the C word. That's the one you still can't say because it has aspects of identity. Yes.
I don't want to say it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, but that it mixes with identity. it's a misogynist term. Some people consider it to be. So that's kept its harshness.
Yeah.
So it's all sort of arbitrary. So I find it arbitrary, and also you see in different cultures like Uruguay, where this footballer was from, or Argentina's similar culture, you can still joke about things. Here, I don't believe we can.
Well, where do you draw the line in your own personal life? And when you're also someone who speaks really openly and in public about politics. Where do you draw the line on your own speech? So you say, like, for example, you don't want to say presume you don't say the N-word?
No.
Right, you don't say it. And why don't you say it? Like,
well, there's a couple of reasons. So one of them is, it's two different hemispheres for it. There's like your vocabulary hemisphere, and then there's the hemisphere. It's a different hemisphere where your swear words are kept, which is why there's a great video where Stephen Fry would put his hand in ice water and he could keep it there longer when he swore.
Yes.
Because it's in a different hemisphere and it sort of changes how your brain reacts. And that's really, really interesting. So partly because it actually viscerally does something to me when I hear or say a swear word, which is why when you're learning a new language, it's always annoyed me a little bit. Like people just come over and use your swear words. It's not a big deal, swear words really, but it's like it doesn't mean the same to you as it does to us. It actually hits us physically. But no, I'd never even said the N-word personally. I must have done in a song. I must have been rapping along at some point and done it in a song, but I wouldn't do so. I have no need to do so. That's it. But you're right. There's a line somewhere.
Yeah. And where do you draw it? I suppose I'm asking because
it's all circumstantial, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's certainly a relief in making this podcast because I think I try to think about what makes Heretics a success in the space, and I don't have the sort of the brains of the trigonometry guys and or Lotus Eaters and those. I don't have that, but I think what I have and what I'm told I have is a kind of nice guy appeal. Like I'm the nice, so people can have the same views as me and not feel like they are now like this angry right wing whatever. And so at the same time, what a relief it is to be in that sphere where you can just make a few jokes sometimes. And you're right, the thing you said earlier about violence, you get desensitized watching and watching and watching.
Yes.
I've been on YouTube now, 5 years, and I'm a Jew. So you can imagine the stuff that has been said to me daily for 5 years from both sides. And now it's just like, oh, yeah, okay. So now I do go away. And the other issue here is a class issue. And I'm sure you're aware of that as well. I don't mean to suggest all working class people are coarser than middle class people, but in some working class spheres.
We are.
Are you a working class or middle class?
Well, I would say I'm a working class person. My parents they're teen parents, and they moved out of a council estate with me when I was 3 to a town in Lancashire to bring me up. I was on free school meals for basically my whole life, and I've always identified with being working class. I suppose the accent's going away because I'm at Cambridge and I've been here for 2 years now, so it does disappear a little bit. I think that aspiration and ambition are like working class traits. Yeah,
well, they are. But there's an aspiration. Sometimes there is also a kind of you define yourself by what you're not, and a lot of working class people resist that as well.
Yeah, it's like the Kanye song, right? Like everything I'm not makes me everything I am.
Yeah, but I don't think he thought about what that meant. I think he's just I think Kanye's a potato.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I sometimes, everyone says he's a genius, right? And I'm sure musically he might be, but the lyrics, it's just so much of it is about cunnilingus. I'm listening, I can't keep listening to this. I've got family around and it's just him talking about doing certain things to women.
Yes.
And I'm going, I don't know where this genius, but I'm sure someone who's listening is very angry at me right now and said, no, he is a genius. Fine, I accept that. So I was hanging out with Tommy Robinson for about 10 days the other week in Israel. He's a charming, really lovely man. He's incredibly smart, but also nuts, right? And that's how he talks. So he is a type of working class person who's probably resisted any kind of aspiration in terms of adopting a middle class kind of voice. And he makes those kinds of jokes. And I'm used to it. So he'll make jokes about every ethnicity. And the funny thing,
I bet Mr. Yaxley Lennon, I bet he goes on and on about all kinds of things.
But he does. But the important part here, though, is you can do it to him. And he will often be sat there at the back of a bus and people are texting him or people are tweeting his biggest enemies, people who want him dead. And they're tweeting the most horrible, horrible things about him. And he's sitting there giggling at the back going, oh yeah, I've got another one. And he reads it out. You little midget, you're a little stupid, fucking this and that. Ha, ha, ha. He finds it really funny because he's got self-deprecating humor. And because he grew up around the boxing clubs and the football fans. And that's just a way of being. I do feel like there's a bit of classism in how he's attacked, often called far right. I think he's, if anything, left of centre politically. His views on immigration certainly are now probably left of centre or centre. He's hated by the far right, but we've got a mainstream now that keeps talking about him as a far right extremist. He's nowhere near it. I mean, he is probably left of the general population. So I don't know where we started with this, to be honest. But
what do you think of his criminal record?
well, is the left not supposed to be about rehabilitating criminals?
Of course.
There's a lot of talk on the left about him, like thug.
Yeah.
They used to call him a racist thug, and then they realised
Then
after
he rebranded because he put his suit on and called himself a journalist. And now he charges thousands of pounds an hour for a consultation.
Well,
that is not a very working class behaviour.
Well, it should be. Firstly, secondly, most you should see the money that middle class people charge for speaking fees.
I bet.
Particularly in the States. Now, if there's a speaker agent out there, please let me know, because I could do with some of that. But the joke going when we were going around Israel was like, should we put some posts out? We'll get another $7,000 from Mossad or whatever, because that's what he's accused of. The reality is, I don't want to go into his personal circumstances, but I don't think he's had good advisors around him financially or legally or anything like that, and that's part of being from his particular working class background. He's not what they think. I think a few thousand for consultation or whatever is quite standard.
This is not to say working class people shouldn't aspire to things and shouldn't make a living. Like, I hate that so much, because I get this too, right? So like I went to South Korea over the summer, and I had a few comments calling me, a champagne socialist and a rich prick, and it's like, well, you actually don't know anything about my life or my finances to start.
So doesn't that make you
also
think...
I'm allowed to aspire to more, right?
Yes.
I'm allowed to want to buy my mum a new fridge.
Not on the left, you're not. You're not
no, I don't buy that.
Oh, come on.
I don't. I think that on hallelujah, let's say I make tons and tons of money, I'll pay my taxes, and I expect the left to shout at me to pay my taxes.
Yeah, well, so we should all pay our taxes.
Yeah, of course we should.
I'm not anti-taxes, but I think given how people have misinterpreted you, don't you feel that way? Maybe Tommy. I mean, what do you think most people on the left would expect to hear Tommy Robinson say when you say, given that Suella Braverman, for example, given that Konstantin Kisin, and many, many others who are considered maybe centre-right, but acceptable faces on TV, would say, if you ask, is Rishi Sunak English? They would say, no, he is not English.
Right.
So what would you expect Tommy Robinson to say?
I don't know. What does he say?
Well, he would say, if you're in England, you're born in England, you love England, you're English. That's it. Right?
Yeah.
So this idea of this kind of, the more I got to know him, the more I was absolutely shocked by the difference between the person he is and what the press made him out to be.
No, I think, and this is not to be like purposefully disparaging or cutting, but I just go with me on it, which is Tommy's not special in the sense that there are many Brits who share his views. There are many Brits who also have criminal records and share his views. And there are many speakers and etc. who charge a lot of money for people to listen to them. I suppose that...
How much do you think Owen Jones charges to speak?
I don't know.
I bet it's a lot.
But I suppose the thing is, when someone is branding themselves within a certain context, you might call it into question, right? So the reason why I brought up Tommy Robinson's fees and stuff is because I think that he's undergone a significant rebrand, and that this might be potentially a bit damaging, because he used to be widely understood as someone who is racist. He started the EDL. I mean, my parents are from St. Helens, and the EDL was huge there, and it still is. And I have literally no qualms in saying that the EDL is a white supremacist.
Do you know why Tommy left the EDL decades
because
ago?
He says that it's a racist organisation.
Right? That's one of the reasons he had a conviction. He got in a fight with a Nazi.
Right, but I think that.
But doesn't that mean something to you?
He also kicked a random black guy. So I honestly, I'm not up on UK domestic politics, especially when it comes to people like Tommy, because, as I say, he's not someone who I particularly find necessarily special. I think I do agree with the idea that he's extremely right wing, as are many Brits themselves.
What is it that you think about Tommy Robinson that makes him right-wing?
Am I right in saying he aligns himself with the Reform Party?
No.
What does he align himself with? What does he say about?
He does. I don't think he gets on with Nigel Farage.
Why not? I mean, many don't.
Because Farage won't associate with Tommy.
Right, yeah.
It's not a vote. It's not a vote
for good
winner.
reason, on a PR level.
On a PR level, it probably is for good reason.
It is for good reason.
What makes you say he's right-wing, Tommy?
Tommy Robinson?
Yeah.
Really?
Explain to me. If it's that obvious,
Yeah.
it gets a really from you, then I want to know what. Just give me some of the obvious answers.
I mean, I took a quick scroll through his Twitter a few weeks ago, and that was the last I have been following
what kind of
Tommy
thing?
Robinson stuff. I mean, he's spoken about the way that he's spoken about. I mean, not to, flog a dead horse, but the way that he's spoken about like Christian nationalism and Charlie Kirk and things, like definitely align
Nationalism's
himself.
often a
himself
lefty
with.
cause.
Christian
Around what?
nationalism isn't.
Christian nationalism isn't. I don't think Tommy's a big Christian though.
Yeah, but I suppose the way he has aligned himself like quite publicly with figures who do occupy that space of
Like
like
who?
Christian nationalism, like Charlie, like
He defended
others.
Charlie, but everyone was defending Charlie because he was into open debate. I would have disagreed with Charlie and I'm an atheist. I would have disagreed on his Christianity. I'd have disagreed with his stance on abortion, probably on
I don't
guns.
think he was doing that thing though of saying, like I'll defend to the death your right to say anything you want, even if I disagree with it. I think he was really quite he's really quite staunchly leaning into the Christian stuff because I think that does probably benefit his cause a lot.
Is it possible that not you necessarily, but people are making assumptions because he fits? I mean, this is human nature, right? Human nature is we all have our tribe. There's someone else who's on the other tribe, and then they're the worst person ever. And then if people say, "Hang on, but you know what? I was with him for 10 days. My wife was with him. He's a really sweet guy. He's a really nice person. He means well. He has a sense of humor." Tommy Robinson, and I've said this to him, he will always let you down. I wrote an article for my Substack while I was in Israel, aligning myself with him. And the next morning I woke up and on Twitter, he said to someone, "You little homosexual," or something like that to someone. He said that. And I went
Classic lefty.
well, you could argue the left is homophobic because of the way that they push people into trans.
I mean, they're not calling people homos online.
No, but they're getting them to cut their willies off. So, which I think is much worse. Tommy would never make you do that. But yeah, and I said to him, "Tommy, mate, I've just written it. Can you not?" And he went, "Yeah, I know. He's a plonker. He's a really smart.
Yeah, that's why
plonker.
I don't concern myself much with him. I don't want to get into
But
the
he's
weeds of
influential.
is he right wing, is he not. Like I care much more about the broader debate or the broader problem,
but
which is like what is this movement? What does the movement look like? And Tommy's unfortunately, regardless as to whether or not he himself is right wing, at the epicenter of a right wing movement that backs him.
But he's hated by the right.
Some
right hates him.
some flanks of the right, I imagine, dislike him. The left isn't
it's a large-
particularly unified either. I
It's
think.
not insignificant.
Yeah.
Because he's too centrist. I think what I'm trying to say to you is like
And that worries me about the state of the right if Tommy's hated for being too centrist. I mean, do you know that guy, the YouTuber Nico?
no.
He's great. He's so funny.
get
He
him on.
made this video. There were these protests. I think what was it? The Unite the Kingdom. Unite the Kingdom rallies, protests,
yeah.
whatever you want to call it. And Nico went undercover as a white guy. So he put on this like white guy mask and stuff, and he had like proper makeup artists, and
Right.
he was playing.
Imagine if a white guy did that.
I mean, he put on a white guy's mask, and he went to a Tommy Robinson rally, and he just spoke to people really. Frankly, he was like, "What do you think about all this stuff?" And he found many a racist.
Yeah,
Like,
but you know
many,
how
many
these things are
racist.
done. Like, do you know Andy No? Do you know who? So the stuff you were saying, Antifa, whatever. Andy No went into Antifa. He found like an unbelievable amount of violence and also racist the other way and white hatred and those kinds of things. We also know that the number of at the United Kingdom rally, the number of arrests was like 10 times lower than even the Notting Hill Carnival, let alone other lefty events. So. I get what you're saying, and we can all do that thing where we go around and we find the person. There are some fringe people, but I could say the same. I've met a lot of the United Kingdom people. They're just nice, normal people. People come up to me in the street all the time, and they're just not, they're just nice, normal.
No,
people.
I suppose this brings us on to the point, which is that there are people with legitimate grievances and concerns that shouldn't be unfairly labelled as racist, right? Like that's obviously.
Such as Tommy.
I don't think that's
Well,
Tommy.
but
I don't
here's
think
the
that's
thing.
what
What would
Tommy
it take
represents.
for me to tell you about Tommy? That would not obviously I'm one person, so it's anecdotal. But what would it take for you to make you go, okay, I'm curious now. Maybe I shouldn't have said far right. Maybe I've listened to people who've said that. And what would it take for me to tell you about him?
Probably just like more of analysis of his own work, like his body of literature.
But I mean, the fact that he says anyone's English, that's pretty lefty now, immigration wise.
Yes, I suppose that also worries me a little bit that there are certain shifts in the Overton window that we're seeing on the right, where even people like Tommy Robinson, who a decade ago was considered widely a racist thug who started the EDL, is now rebranded under a journalistic image and considered centre-right, even by, like you say, considerable flanks on the right. That doesn't mean to me that he should be welcomed within the left as someone who represents us, because I don't think he does.
To not be welcomed in a circle, you've got to be really quite extreme, I guess, and to have done things that are
I mean, I
irredeemable.
don't think that he should be labelled as such, right?
Christopher Hitchens was a Marxist, for example, and then by the end he was like this kind of I don't know if you're familiar with Hitchens.
A little bit.
Yeah, but he was now like the sort of, like, I suppose, the centre right champion. But he was a Marxist back in the day, and people swap and change and all of those kinds of things. So Tommy was this young guy from boxing club. I mean, where is that kind of lefty compassion? Is what, not from you specifically, I mean from the left, of like, and not just the left, the centre, the TV channels, the Jews, right? I'm a Jew, so I feel I can say this. They lost their shit because Israel identified with Tommy Robinson, and they're so scared. They're going like, "Oh no, don't! He's the worst ever." And I say, "Why?" And I can't get an answer. He's been to prison. I mean, he fought a Nazi at one point. I think they were things like to do with he put that film out, which he disagrees with. A lot of people who have seen that film think he has a point. Most people who hate him and criticize him haven't seen the film. So at what point, I mean, from history, we've always had people who the press or the media or people have gone, he's an outsider, and later they've been reevaluated. So what you call a sort of rebranding, I see as a reevaluation. And look, that leads, I guess I want to know, like, is there anything I can say that can make, or has anything I've said made you think, maybe I need to look more into this guy, maybe he's not the bogeyman?
No, this is the thing, like, I don't concern myself, I don't think about Tommy a lot. Like, barely ever do I think about Tommy Robinson.
But you should. He's an important political figure now.
Sure, there are tons of important political figures who I don't think about or don't know enough about as potentially maybe I should do. And if it's something that you recommend, then of course I'll go and look into what his views are. But from an outsider's perspective, what I see of Tommy Robinson is someone who hasn't made up for the, like...
What?
The racist organisation of the EDL. Like, I think that...
But he left it when it got racist.
When did it get racist?
I
think it began as a racist organisation.
So that, I guess, leads us onto the next point, I suppose, which would be nationalism, which I think is often seen.
Yeah.
I know you made the point about Christian nationalism. That's a separate issue, although I can see how it can combine as well.
Yeah.
Again, these are things that it's so hard because you're 20.
20 now. Yeah.
20. I mean, that's mad young, and I'm amazed by you and how smart you are. And also I'm sitting here thinking, I should tell you because it's just at the back. It's just on, and it's patronite. I don't care if it's patronite. It's just the truth. I'm thinking in 5 years you're going to be on our side.
A lot of people tell me that. I get told that a lot.
It's got to happen because the thing is, when I was younger, I thought of like the right. It was this scary kind of thing, and you meet them, and a lot of them are like, they're quite nice guys. They just sort of care about certain things, and you understand their side. Now, that's why a lot of people on the left refuse to discuss with them, but you do discuss with them.
Yes, I do. I discuss a lot with the right, yeah.
Which I love.
Thank you.
I think it's really admirable, particularly at your age. And you're quite a unique figure anyway, because you're not just smart. You grew up in the circumstances you described.
Yeah.
I think that's like the right love that.
They're into it.
And it's social mobility, right? Which the left should love as well. So what I'm trying to say is that I'm 36 now.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to think when I'm 46, I'll also have much more developed ideas than I do now. Otherwise, I won't have learned. And 10 years ago, I thought nationalism was this terrible, terrible thing. I lived in Argentina for some years. I've come to learn recently that whenever I mention Argentina, people drink. It's like they have a drinking game when they're watching. Apparently, if I say Argentina or bloody hell, those are two things that I didn't even realize I oversay them.
Really?
Yeah, people have a drink. But so enjoy that drink. But I came to realize that nationalism there was a lefty cause, as it is in places Canada. And it's so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I thought, okay, well, I'm pro-immigration in the sense that I like the idea of a multiracial society.
Okay.
I don't like the idea of a multicultural society.
Okay.
And I feel like multiculturalism is in a sense the opposite of nationalism. And so what we're left with is we can't even define ourselves. Why would anybody coming to this country want to assimilate into what is essentially a vacuum? Can you see what I'm saying?
I do. I suppose the question I'll ask is, what does a good culture look like for you? What's the best culture that might emerge from, like, if we say we don't want multiculturalism anymore, we want to establish something new or something from the past or something different. How might you envision it?
I would want to put my heads together with smart people like you,
okay,
and smart people like, someone like, well, not Charlie Kirk necessarily. That's a very American thing. He just came into my head. But really intelligent people who are not biased one way or another and can sit there and go, what is it we want? I mean, I saw Richard Dawkins having a fascinating debate with Ayaan Hirsi Ali, where she said basically, look, there's a vacuum here. Now wokeness has taken over. We need Christianity instead. To which obviously he didn't like that, being an avowed atheist, as like me. And I was on his side watching, and he was going, we need to teach logical thinking, critical thinking, rationalism in our society. I think maybe that's a bit naive. I don't think that's like a sexy thing to lean into, rationalism, not so much as Christianity or wokeness. And what I've come to my conclusion now is, you look at society, the way that Britain was formed, it was kind of Protestantism, right, or Christianity.
Yes, yeah.
It formed a lot of the stuff. Some people would argue actually it was the Greek Roman stuff. David Starkey argues it's not really Christianity adapted that into what we have now.
Yeah.
But it was pretty good. We were like the leading country in the world in terms of culture, obviously with loads of problems, right? But I think happiness standards were up. I'm talking about in the 1970s, 90s.
Okay, the 80s and 90s.
Maybe.
Okay.
What do you think? Do you think no?
Oh no, I suppose it depends. I mean, when you said that we at one point were the leading country in terms of
you
culture,
thought empire?
I thought maybe you're doing British Empire. If you have like a specific remit, or if you don't, we can really broaden it. But
I don't have a specific. I would say 1900s Britain was the country in the world that firstly everybody wanted to immigrate to, understandably. Why wouldn't they? It's a great country. It had a good economy. It's music culture, it's arts culture, it's liberalism. So I suppose at that point we'd come to terms with homosexuality being a thing that can be part of our society. So maybe I am talking about post 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. Obviously, I'm falling into a trap of looking back to my own childhood in the 90s.
Yeah, everything's when I was 12, everything was cool.
Everything was great, right? So there is that point as well. And Britain meant something. People wore British flags. You go to Israel, you go to Argentina. But flags, and a flag's a silly thing, right? But it's something for people to unite around. Yeah. So I don't necessarily know what must replace multiculturalism or wokeness or Christianity or whatever it is. Do you have ideas?
I think that, like, if I were to manufacture a culture on an individual level and say, right, now you're all like, this is Tilly's culture. Yeah. I suppose there are things that I objectively prefer about different societies, right? I would eliminate patriarchy, of course, that kind of stuff. I, like you, share the view that a multiracial society is a good thing overall. I think it's a good thing.
I think I'd say it's a neutral thing for me.
Yeah, I suppose, yeah. Ultimately net neutral because in an ideal world, race would be as unimportant as eye colour or how we style our hair or whatever.
At the same time, the science, look, without going into the Nazi stuff, the science isn't really clear on there are differences between races. It might be that some races are more likely to go for one particular culture, others to another, and so on. We don't know that. I
haven't seen much. I suppose this is a biological anthropology thing again. I remember doing this really fascinating supervision, we call them at Cambridge. It's like a kind of a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 professor-student relationship where people hash out ideas and like critically engage with the research that we've looked at. And there was this research paper that was just so interesting, and it taught me something that I didn't know, which was oftentimes there are more genetic variances within races than there are between them. And if that doesn't tell me that race is like so wildly unimportant, I don't know what does. The
problem is, and this is the problem with debates, I think, is that everybody has a study that suits their cause, and obviously at a university, they're never going to look at the alternative, are they? Can you actually imagine going into a lesson or a lecture and the topic of discussion is the differentials in IQ between different races?
Oh, we have. I have.
Because I think
done that. I'm sorry.
The evidence does suggest that there are huge differences. I mean, Ashkenazi Jews, for example, and and I don't want to go into I don't want to get too controversial. I don't think it's necessary right now, but there are huge differentials in IQ.
Yes, there are. There are differentials in IQ, and we've studied that at length in.
That's interesting.
At university.
So you've got differences in IQ. Well, that will make for different cultures. We could admit that.
Oh no, I don't necessarily.
How can it not?
To the same extent. The first thing is that IQ as a particular test is like an incredibly specific and narrow way to measure how intelligent someone is. It doesn't really tell us much about how they're going to act necessarily. It doesn't really translate behaviorally all that much, especially because when you look at IQ, it's something that's really malleable and you can improve it quite easily.
So would you say in our prison system, the IQ will just look like the same variance?
No, that's not what I'm saying at all. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that the IQ isn't a fixed state of being that then determines how people act for the rest of their lives. IQ and this type of thing. Firstly, as I say, it's very narrow and way to measure things. And the IQ test itself, like among psychologists and stuff, it's just not used anymore, basically, in terms of like when we want to think about how people behave and why they behave that way. So I suppose that. And the other thing is IQ. There was a great study. I don't know if you're gonna say this just suits my own worldview, but there was this really interesting study I looked at when I was about 16 or 17 that has just stuck with me ever since, which was a group of kids with special needs took IQ tests before and after a whole bunch of tutoring from really bright professors. And their IQ, I think it was like a couple of months of tutoring or training for the IQ test, and their IQ point, their average went up by something like 12 to 15 points or something within the course of a couple of months. So you can imagine.
Of course,
like,
I made that point to an IQ professor who was telling me that, but he made the point that yes, but when there's been twins who are separated at birth, even with totally different backgrounds, educations, those kinds of things, they tend to have similar IQs as well. So there is, yes, there are problems with it. I agree with that. But some races are stronger and faster than others.
Do you think that? I mean, I'm going to go there because I think maybe you won't. But do you think that, let's say Somalia and I think Nepal have very low average IQs? Do you think that those people have any natural lack of intellectual capacity? Or do you think that other correlationary factors are stronger, such as poverty, socioeconomic status, war?
Well, I made that point as well to this professor, and he seemed to suggest that it's not really. He sort of he poo-pooed your point about the learning for an IQ. So we'd have to have him sat with us.
Yeah, we would. But
look, I'm not here to sort of push eugenics. I'm just
exactly.
trying to.
I suppose I want to nail down what do you think about?
I think we don't know. I think these are questions to ask. I think we need to look at and go, why was it? It's a question to ask. And it's the kind of thing that if I was on the BBC right now, I'd be scared to even think about talking about, but we need to talk about it. Why is it that certain societies progress so much faster than other ones? And those all tended to be white Europeans. And then we can mix that with culture. But then there's a chicken and egg situation. Who created the culture? And we're talking about Protestant Christianity. That's hard for me as an atheist to accept. But look at Britain, look at Germany, look at the States, look at Australia. And it's even to just Catholicism, totally different in terms of how their cultures have earned money, culture, those kinds of things. So I'm not sitting here saying I've got the answer. Right. I'm saying, gosh, I guess what I'm trying to ask you to do with Tommy Robinson, at what point would something flip for you? And it shouldn't happen when you're 20 years old. But if you heard more of me and other people talking about that for 10 years, maybe it might. And I'm saying I'm at a point now where I'm going, I'm an atheist. I believe in individual liberty. I believe in equality for all races. And yet there are some unavoidable facts about the way that we've progressed as countries that are really hard to completely forget about.
Sure. I think I've read a great book on this that got basically eviscerated at university because it was really quite simplistic, but because there are loads of other reasons as to why some countries succeed and some don't. It's called Why Nations Fail. It's by two authors, and they talk about different forms of extraction in societies and different ways that we do things like currency and whether or not we're inclusive. And I don't mean inclusive as in the postmodern way that we talk about inclusivity and intersectionality. Now I mean inclusive like economically. And they talk about income inequality, all kinds of things, and as to why different nations have failed and they haven't. I don't think that this is something that is down to race.
But then if it's not race, then it's culture, okay? And then we are in a situation where we've got one of the best cultures, right? We're not a nation that failed relative to the rest of the world. Most people born today would be much better off being born in Britain than Pakistan, Bangladesh. That might not always be the case, of course. That can change. Rwanda, there are most countries in the world you could name, and you'd be better off being born in Britain or America or several European countries, right? And if you say, I don't think this has anything to do with race, and I don't think either of us can discount that, because at the end of the day, these are unanswerable questions. But
I think they were answered in the 70s or something by biologists.
Well, okay. Well, let's say that's the case. Then.
Yeah.
This is not something. This is not. It's not the hill I want to die on.
Yeah.
Like I don't care enough about it.
I kind of do die on the hill of like race science. And
yeah,
stuff, so.
sure. I would like look. I said myself, I'd like a multiracial society. I don't think the differences are large enough to make for much of a difference. So so let's agree on that.
Yeah,
let's agree that race is, apart from the one guy I interviewed, who's one professor who said big differences in IQ. That's one guy, and might be nonsense. That means we're relying totally on culture as the differences, right?
Geography, empire, history, socioeconomic status, type of political system. There are also those things that I don't think we should discount.
No, okay, not discounted.
So like I suppose you might bring up Islamic. Sorry to interrupt, but you might
okay.
bring up Islamic countries where patriarchy is mandated by law. That's a legislative, political thing that's not necessarily tied to culture, even though it might be linked, right? At the same time,
if it's in all 52 countries or 55 countries, then does that not suggest it has something to do with the culture of that religion?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm an atheist like you. I got a lot of stick for saying that Islam mistreats women. I also I said it in my Charlie debate that got like tons of views, and lots of people had problems with me for saying that I think Islam mistreats women. At the same time, I think this is a different conversation when we're talking about British Muslims. So especially young, like second generation British Muslims, that kind of thing. I went to a school in high school that must be one third Muslim girls. It was an all girls school because it's a grammar school. So I was really quite lucky to go there, and I was surrounded by really fantastic, strong, feminist Muslim girls who, for all intents and purposes, were much more progressive than the average person.
Which means that they had adopted our culture, which is good.
But they were also,
because that's not happening.
Proudly Muslim. They also, like some of the most devout Muslims that I've met.
So those girls integrated to an extent, at least, right, to British society.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good thing. Do you know of Catherine Burble-Singh?
No.
She's got a school called the Michaela School. And
is this the curly-haired lady who's talking about being the strictest teacher in the world? You've had her on, I think. Yeah. So
I think she said her school's like 90% Muslim. But she, again, going back to that flag concept, she has the English or British flag. They watch the England football games, and they have the best results in the country. These are very working class, these are the impoverished boys and girls, mostly Muslim, who have a real sense of being British and English and have huge, like incredible levels of success. Yeah. But Catherine, is hated by the left. This is what a lot of people on my side are scratching our heads about, because we're sitting here going, okay, you don't want us to be proud of this culture, but you want people to come from cultures where we know, as you said yourself, and you've got a lot of shit from people for saying that women are terribly mistreated in these countries, among many other things. I mean, that's one of the, and we're trying to get them to assimilate to our values, which, yes, there might be a patriarchy or this or that, but compared to most of the rest of the world, it's not too bad here.
Yeah, I think that, I suppose there are a few things to cite in order to do the balancing act, which is that obviously misogyny isn't strictly imported. If it were strictly imported, then we wouldn't have an endemic domestic violence problem. We wouldn't have 2 women a week killed by a current or former partner. We wouldn't have the biggest killer of men under 40 being suicide. We wouldn't have half of young male Brits saying that women's rights have gone too far, right? So misogyny isn't strictly an import, and it is worth saying that that's the truth.
There are levels.
There are also levels, and there are also Eastern European countries that are staunchly Christian that I would hate to live in. I mean, Andrew Tate cites Romania is a great place to bring up a girl.
Would you rather Romania or Saudi Arabia if you had to choose?
Well, it's more like Romania or Turkey, that kind of thing. Like we say, there are levels, and I would compare Romania to certain Islamic countries.
I'll take Romania, and Turkey's not.
I've been to Turkey.
It's not officially an Islamic country.
It's largely
that's of the 52 to 55.
This is why I say when you have a patriarchy that's also embedded in the law, this is where you enter many serious issues. So you have Turkey, which is an Islamic country for all intents and purposes, But at the same time, it's not theocratic. You have all kinds of problems. There's democratic backsliding over there because of Erdogan and this type of thing, though. I was there in Turkey when protests broke out across Istanbul because the mayor of Istanbul was arrested on these bogus corruption charges so that Erdogan could continue his backsliding. But he campaigned on quite centrist liberal values initially, and people voted him in, And,
what does it say to you that even, I guess I'm going back to what I asked you earlier about, even saying that Charlie Kirk, like, it was sad what happened to him, got you so much flack from people on your side. And then also you saying that women are seriously mistreated in Muslim countries has got you in such trouble. Something that, this is the emperor's new clothes, isn't it? This is like, this table's brown, like, women are mistreated in Muslim countries seriously and significantly more than here. And to say otherwise, I think, would be to, seriously insult those women who have been through that.
Yeah, I also think that there are plenty of Muslim women who speak about this probably much better than I do.
But what about the problem? What about that left that's attacking you for even?
This is what I was going to say. There are many left-wing women who have been brought up or grown up in or have family members in Islamic countries and things, and they talk about things, what it's like to live there and the reality of their lived experience much better than I do as well. Like they also sit on the left. I don't think, as you accuse me of doing, saying that the right, it's monolithic. I don't think that we should smear the left with the same type of thing. I think that the left are open to conversations, at least in my experience, about
the difference between the left
about religion, organized religion, patriarchy and law, and how those things interact to create a society that mistreats women.
The difference, I think, between the left and the right, though, is that the left is mainstream. So the views of the left and that left that forbids anybody from pointing out that there are problems in Islamic countries pervades our culture and our televisions. So the average person who isn't that clued up on this stuff will turn the TV on, and they're very unlikely to hear anybody say, yes, there might be some misogyny here, but can you imagine any of those countries that are Muslim countries, the 50 or so of them? And, if we're going to get our immigration from those countries, well, we need to be very careful about who we bring in, and we need to make sure that we incentivize them at least to assimilate. Assimilate into what? Maybe some kind of national identity that we have, instead of just always denigrating our own nationality. Because if we do that and immigration is very fast, then those people who come from cultures where women are treated that badly, there's no such thing as magic soil that just changes them to suddenly have our views. And if they're not incentivized, they're going to take that misogyny to the UK. So I think a lot of people are concerned about feminists, or so-called feminists, who would have that happen. And feminism is just the tip of the iceberg. So according to Pew Research, Pakistan, for example, 99% of people in Pakistan have unfavorable views of Jews. Mm-hmm. That was taken way before October the 7th. So, I know that's made things even worse for Jews. In most countries around Pakistan, we're dealing with like 97 to 99, sometimes 96. I think Turkey was like an amazing example where it's only something like 70 or 80, I'd have to check it, % of people have unfavorable views of Jews. So if you're a Jewish person living in this country right now, knowing that there is, among a minority, violence in Islam, and I think there is a percent, I need to find out what that percentage is, whether it's 1 or 10% of people who believe it's okay to be violent in the name of your religion. Given that the Quran speaks about Jews 80 times and has more Jew hate in it than Mein Kampf, and that Mein Kampf is a popular book still in the Middle East, it's in libraries and things like that. If you were a Jewish person today living in the UK, and you knew that we were importing up to 1 million people from those parts, would you be concerned?
So, okay, there were a whole bunch of questions within this. So I just wrote down Jews because this is slightly meandering from the initial point that the thrust of the initial argument that you wanted to make, which was that mainstream media conforms to left-wing narratives and most of mainstream media is left-wing. What would you say, or what would your response be to the idea that Rupert Murdoch owns most mainstream UK newspapers, or that GB News is the most watched entertainment or news platform in the country right now?
GB News was a response to that.
So therefore, if you have this viable alternative response, which becomes the most popular channel in the country, where I think at the moment Reform is polling 32%, and I don't see censorship or conformity to left-wing narratives there. I see fair representation of political views, albeit political views that I abhor and don't think people should ascribe themselves to.
But the fact that they had to make that and that the country needed that, it suggests there was a huge gap between elites who managed the TV channels. I take your point on Murdoch, but I guess he just isn't that involved in the actual. And I'm not suggesting the Daily Mail's left wing. I'm not suggesting the Sun's left wing. I understand that point as well.
Well, what are our mainstream left wing media?
I think I'm talking about the BBC, particularly because it's state adjacent. And did you see the report in the last few days, the BBC?
No, I didn't see it.
So they've just had a report. I mean, the levels are shocking, the left-wing bias. I think left-wing people are drawn to media. And unfortunately, you do get that. The fact that GB News needed to be made as an alternative to it, I think shows how far gone it was. The most egregious example was how they edited footage of Trump when he was
I did see that.
the
I
January
saw that.
6th thing. And then Have I Got News for You, which is supposed to be kind of like the views, the eyes of the BBC. That's what that comedy show is. They just completely like minimized it. It was like watching, for me, it was like watching Stalinist Russia or something. They were sitting there going, gosh, well, they didn't even need to doctor it because he was clearly calling for incitement to violence, and he wasn't. So they hadn't learned their lesson. They hadn't said, oh my God, we're so embarrassed. It was just like, let's do more ideology. So from our perspective, looking in, we're going, thank God GB News came around when it did in the last couple of years, and people are finally getting some truth. But I don't like that idea. I don't like that the only alternative to the BBC is the anti-BBC. I want a bunch of channels that are neutral. And we can't have that while the BBC, ITV, Channel 4, they're nuts right now, in my opinion. They're just completely nuts.
I suppose that a couple of things. The first is that I genuinely don't find that neutrality exists anywhere. I don't think that we should, and this is a danger that I would agree with you on the BBC about, which is the BBC has historically and wrongly been upheld as an unbiased news source through which people get factual information absent of propaganda. That's nonsense. It's totally nonsense, because there is no such thing as neutral political environments. That's not a thing.
It could at least reflect its people. And clearly, as you've said from GB News, it didn't reflect its people.
But this is the thing. I think that I remember being very young and watching and you mentioned that Corbyn is someone that you really don't like. And I was a huge Corbyn fan, and I still am, although I don't have much hope for his party. I remember seeing the way that Corbyn was presented on the BBC, and he was they took a picture of him, or someone found a picture of him wearing a hat, like a fluffy hat, because it was cold, and then they colour graded it with a red overlay and then put stripes behind him, like it was a Stalinist, like this weird communist guy. And the same with Rishi Sunak during COVID. When Rishi Sunak was Chancellor, the BBC made cartoons of him as a superhero, where he was going out saving lives. And we know that that's not fair. That's not unbiased at all.
They also came down quite hard on Truss and all those kinds of things as well. I think the Corbyn thing, he wasn't helping himself, because if that was at the time, I'm thinking it was when there were the poisonings from Russia going on, and he was the one MP who refused to blame Russia. It doesn't help his cause.
I think that if you are going to make the case that the BBC is ultra left-leaning, then you should probably take into account examples where the BBC has expressed right-wing bias as well. So one of the things that I've noticed and then looked into and found out that actually I happen to be correct about this, which is that coverage of various political parties in the UK are really asymmetric at the moment on the BBC, particularly when it comes to reform, and particularly Nigel Farage. So you have the Green Party with Zach Polanski polling at really similar levels to Nigel at the moment, and this is quite a recent development.
So he's at like 17 and Reform are at like 30.
Recent polling has shown that both of them are at 30, or at least some polling has shown that both are at 30%. And the Green, I mean, even if this isn't true, right? The Green
all I've seen is Zach. I've seen him. I can't open my eyes without seeing Polanski.
But if you look at the coverage of Nigel versus Zach on places like the BBC, you'll see asymmetric coverage of Nigel, even when you take into account proportional factors. And
but how often are they in favour of Nigel? It's one thing to put him on as the guy to hate. He's constantly just heckled and shouted at
by the BBC.
Yeah, I mean, the same happened with Trump. This was what came out in the report the last few days, and I encourage you to have a look at it. They found 0 instances of anybody even thinking Trump might win, for example, like 0.
Yes.
And 0.
I think that's insane, by the way. Because,
and 0 where he was spoken about favourably. All of them were pro Kamala, and all of them thought she was going to win as well. It just showed these guys don't represent real people. They're like a bunch, and I've met them. These guys are just media idiots who come straight out of university, don't actually see real life, real world, and they don't speak for us anymore. And I know that sounds like I'm parroting the kind of, the elites kind of thing, but that's my experience of it. But I want to get your thought, the Jews point. How would you feel as a Jewish family? Do you know what a mezuzah is?
No, I don't.
The mezuzah is the little thing they put outside. People won't know what it is, but they've seen it. It's like a rectangle. It's put on the side of doors outside. You'll have seen them. I probably shouldn't say because it gives people a target now.
Right.
But it's just like some sort of religious cultural thing. Even atheist Jewish
I think
families,
I know what you mean. I think I know what
they
you
have
mean.
these little things on the side of the doors.
Yeah.
And every Jewish family I know in the UK in the last couple of years, as immigration has heated up, has taken theirs down.
Yeah.
Because it would identify them as Jews right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the situations where I'm not saying we can't bring people in from that part of the world, but if we don't push our values of whatever Britishness is, which I hope would mean all races, all religions, all creeds, and those kinds of, if we don't push that, then how would you feel as a Jewish family now?
I don't know how I would feel. I can't imagine how I would feel as a Jewish family at the moment. I think that what we're seeing is like, I mean, some of the, I don't know if you're familiar with the Groypers.
Yeah.
Of course, you must be. I mean, some of
They're
this
horrible.
stuff, this is now a mainstream movement where Jewish power and Jewish control and all of this type of stuff that is straight from the Nazi playbook has become mainstream, and I think it's awful.
We're not importing millions of Groypers to the UK every year.
I don't think we need to import millions of Groypers to the UK. I think they're already
But I'm saying
here
that's
in our
not the
native white
worry
Brits,
right now. That's not the concern for Jewish people right now.
To me,
It's-
this as someone, as an outsider, and you can so feel free to say that whatever, you're wrong. To me, when I see Groypers and people who are continuously opening the door to question Jewish power, etc., I think this is a similar level of threat to anyone who views Jews unfavorably, full stop. I think that I'm actually writing my dissertation on part of this, which is it's to do with remapping the discourse between young men. So my dissertation is about, and I promise it's relevant, it's not just a chance to plug it, like my dissertation is about the extent to which misogyny is a primary gateway factor to modern contemporary fascist views in the UK and the United States among young men. And one of the things that I have noticed about the discourse is that it ends at Jews quite often. So it's either so the extremely fascist.
But we know the far right do
young
that.
men.
We've known that since Hitler. We know the far right do that. And
Yes.
But we're not bringing, as I say, and I'm not saying you want that either, but we're not bringing millions of Groypers to the UK. It's a very American phenomenon, but we have them in Britain as well.
We have more than you think. I suppose this is the
Sure.
question that I pose, which is, are you also worried about the extent to which this type of view is becoming mainstream in the UK? Because, and this is not to
Of
deflect,
course I
this is
am.
not
Oh,
to
yeah.
deflect at all, because I can imagine that many people have an unfavorable view of Jews for literally thousands of years. Jews have been scapegoated as a threat that is neither here nor there, right?
Every conversation we have with Jewish families around the table kind of thing, it's do we have to leave? Do we have to flee right now? What's going to happen? The amount, it's shit right now. It's really shit. And when we are going, gosh, look at the Groypers kind of thing, that's a real worry. And that's, you see Ben Shapiro and all these people, they're all speaking out against it. Constantine is doing that. They're really pushing back against that. Charlie Kirk did as well. They all pushed against that kind of thing. But I'm not talking to a Groyper or a Groyper adjacent. I'm talking right now to a progressive who I believe is in favor of multiculturalism. And I'm saying the impact of that multiculturalism, while we can also, let's discard the Groypers, I agree with you on that. The impact is we are getting 1 million people a year. And I guess I want to give you an opportunity to say that might be a downside of multiculturalism. But I feel like, are you in a place where you're disincentivized from doing so because you might get attacks from your own tribe?
No, the reason why I'm disincentivized from doing so is because whenever I talk about Islam, what comes up in my head is the Muslim girls who I grew up with and how I might want to represent them when I'm on a podcast and when I'm talking to people. Because although I will speak out against religion, organized religion, I've spoken out against Islam as well, I always think about humanity at the back of my mind. I always think about those girls in my classroom.
I know, but sometimes you have to be stronger.
Sure, I think our country needs to be stronger. I think we're a powerhouse. I think that we need to come down hard, not just legally, but culturally on views that are...
sometimes we have to say, hey, we're both liberals here. We both believe in those Muslims and their right to be here, to live here, to be passionate about this country. I hope they are, and to practice their faith. However, there's a concern that some of those women will have grown up, and I'm certain of this, at least some of them, not all of them, will have grown up hearing the most abhorrent anti-Semitic conspiracy theories you can imagine, because every Muslim I know, every single one has told me that that's how they grew up. Now, those are the ones who are honest with me because they've now left that kind of thinking behind. We now have millions and millions and millions of people in this country who actively hate Jews because of their culture, because of where they're from and what they brought to this country, and because there's no magic soil, because it can't change those beliefs. And that's petrifying to me. And a problem I have is that the left, particularly the young left, who are up and aggressive and they're fighting for everyone, are unwilling to say it because they fear offending. But I'm saying we can't keep fearing that.
Right. I understand the tolerance paradox thing, right? Which is that if we continue to be tolerant of intolerant values and beliefs, then we end up in an intolerant situation at large. And this is why I think the country does need to wrap its arms around vulnerable people at a time when things have become polarized, and at a time when there is like devastating outcomes for people globally, right?
But these are political answers. I'm asking you, is it a problem? And is it something we've got to rectify, that millions of people we bring to this country every year hate Jews?
Like I said, I haven't
heard this. We know this statistically. We know this is true.
We know that it's genuinely true that
99% of Pakistanis, according to Pew Research, and I will show you this afterwards, so for the sake of debate, Pew Research have unfavourable views, and that shouldn't surprise you. I don't think most people will be surprised by that.
I honestly, and I really don't want to be awful to you as a Jewish person, but it's rare that I meet someone who at the moment does have particularly favourable views of Jewish people. And I'm sorry to say it, like I really am. I think, as I say, I speak out against organised religion. I think that one of the reasons why, like the Abrahamic, although you guys worship the same Abrahamic God, the three Abrahamic religions are always fighting with each other, and I hate it. And
well, half of Jews are secular. That's
yes, of course.
It's
a religion and ethnicity.
Yeah. So when we're not talking about the religious fights, we're talking about ethnic Jews. Like I don't get a free pass by saying I don't believe in God. I get taken to Hitler's whatever, or the Muslim version of that. So that's very worrying for me. I don't have a religion. I'm not fighting. Also, if we did speak purely about religion, Islam is not mentioned a single time in the Torah. It's not a part of Jewish religion and faith. That's why you don't get Jewish attacks on Muslims, even among the religious. It's not a thing because Islam wasn't invented.
I suppose something that I would pull up is that I'm slightly unconvinced by the argument that the basis of the religious text itself is always going to dictate outcomes necessarily, because we've seen divergences based on other outside factors. So like what I mean by that is, let's say we have the slavery example where the Bible, especially the Old Testament, but also the New Testament, has mentions of slavery, not only just mentions of it, but biblical prescriptions as to how you should treat slaves, what you should do to slaves, etc. Some of this is horrific. Some of this is condoning the murder of women and children and innocents.
Yeah.
And scripture was used for thousands of years to back up this horrific treatment of human beings as a property class.
Yeah.
And it's
although that slavery was not just a Christian thing. That was
no, of course it wasn't. Of course it wasn't.
That's just human. That was human nature.
I'm not really big on human nature.
But they all did it.
But
they all did it.
Yeah,
the Slavs were doing it. The Africans were doing it. Everyone was keeping slaves.
Yes, but I suppose the argument that I want to make is that the outcome of a Bible that essentially condones and prescribes slavery was a profoundly anti-slavery like clerical body, right? So you have sermons speaking out again, sermons where that are super famous. I can't remember what they're called, but during early years of the United States, you have Christians who speak out ardently against slavery by reinterpreting the Bible and playing a hermeneutics game with it and this type of thing. So basically the thing I would say is, even if the Quran does contain horrific mentions of like anti-Jewish hatred and violence towards Jews, I think that the way that religious texts have been reinterpreted and across history gives me hope that can happen again.
Sure. Richard Dawkins said Islam's no different to Christianity in his view, but except it's 700 years behind. It started 700 years later, and they're 700 years behind in how they interpret it. Now, again, I agree with you. We can change that.
Yeah, I think
but we can only do that by saying, come to our culture and be different. Now, there's another way to do it, which is how they've done it in the UAE, Saudi Arabia. You don't get so much Jew hate, you don't get terrorist attacks because they are authoritarian dictatorships. I don't suggest we do that.
I don't want that either.
But they go really hard on the terrorist groups. So Muslims, Jews, not that there are many Jews at all, but they can get along fine. Everything's fine there, but horrible authoritarianism. If you just allow what we've allowed here, come and we cherish your culture, that Jew hate's not going to stop, that women hate's not going to stop, that gay hate is not going to stop. And so this is why so many people on my side are so frustrated with the left, because we want to hear you guys saying, liberalism, yes, let's be liberal because that's what I want. But be intolerant, as you say, of illiberalism is the only way. We have to be stronger. By all means, have people come from those places, but we have to teach them from day one, no Jew hate, no gay hate. And if you think that's part of your culture, you are not welcome here.
Oh, I agree with assimilation measures. I think that we should also expedite processing asylum claims. I think that we should strike up more deals with neighbouring countries that we had pre-Brexit, so that we don't have to have experience an unfair burden. Potentially, I think that we should totally change the system through which we expedite the immigration process for
you're
people.
just saying
And I
bring
think
more immigrants.
No, not at all.
Expedite it.
Not at all. Expedite the process, as in get rid of the backlog of asylum seekers who are currently housed in hotels and other things. That's caused so much controversy.
But that wouldn't get rid of them from the country. That would
No,
keep
it wouldn't.
them in
Which is why I think there are multiple solutions to this. It's a very
it's keeping more people in this country who hate Jews.
Well, no, I think that this is why I say that I agree with you. Bring people into the country, or at least I don't necessarily describe as bringing people into the country necessarily, because I don't think we're importing them. I think that we're a country that experiences immigration like many countries, and we don't take an unfair amount of refugees or asylum seekers or immigrants compared to most other countries in the world. Although it's true that we've had an increase in an uptick in immigration, that's not something that I'm going to shy away from saying. And I also think that it's been badly dealt with. I think that people have been crammed into impoverished areas unfairly, and that the resources have been strained thin. And therefore, we should probably do something of where we redistribute people in a fair way that allows for better assimilation and that type of thing. And
can you understand why a Jewish family might say, screw that, I don't care, I don't want these people in this country right now, because many, many, many of them want me dead?
Yeah, of course I do. Of course I understand that. I'm not someone who's going to sit and lord it over someone who is Jewish and say that I don't think that it's fair that you're worried about prejudice against you.
But I don't want you to bear that in mind, because a part of me not being part of that identity progressive side is that you should be able to say whatever you want to me without worrying about who.
Sure. In which case, I will also add that I think one of the ways that we combat the hatred that we're seeing for Jewish people at the moment, especially at the moment, is by dealing with the horrific situation that's happening in Palestine. And I'm sure you sit across the aisle from me on this issue, but I think one of the things that has been unfairly done, sometimes Jewish people themselves have done this, is associate themselves so heavily with the pro-Israel cause that being Jewish is seen as synonymous with being pro-Israel.
95% of Jews are Zionists, I think. I don't know if it's still that high. Zionist doesn't mean you agree with the Netanyahu government, of course, but it's that you should have land. I mean, of course, but then we're in that dangerous territory of hey, look at what Saudi Arabia does, therefore we should accept that there's more abuse against Muslims in this country.
That's why I'm not saying that. That's why I would never excuse a hate crime against a Jewish person, even if
so it should be irrelevant.
No, I don't think it's irrelevant either. I don't think it's irrelevant either.
So is it irrelevant when Saudi Arabia treats people terribly? Is that Muslims are being blamed for that in the UK? Why is that?
Wait, sorry, what do you mean?
Why would it be fair to suggest that it's sort of understandable that there's hatred for Muslims because of actions by a foreign government that is a Muslim government, such as Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, no, that's why I'm saying it's not fair. That's the argument that I'm making, right? Which is that it's not fair that Jewish people are unfairly targeted just because of the actions of a foreign government. And it's not fair for me to go up to someone who's from Saudi Arabia and call them a member of the Taliban. Neither of those things are fair circumstances. And one of the things that you go about doing in terms of the public consciousness, in terms of media, in terms of how people view themselves and perceive others, is you separate, even though this might be a huge correlation, you separate being Jewish as an identity from liking the Netanyahu government.
Yeah, they can do that, but they shouldn't have to. They should be able to have any political views without being concerned that people are going to hate them for their ethnicity.
Yeah.
So that's the thing here. Now, I think even most Israelis are not happy with Netanyahu. So, that is what it is. But I think you and I would probably disagree about the war itself.
Yeah.
There are many wars going on right now in the world where terrible, terrible things are happening. Yes. Almost all of them involve Islam, at least on one side. So, and I think that's just a pattern to look into. And I don't mean a pattern as in, we should ask questions. I mean, it is because of Islam and because of where Islam is 700 years behind Christianity that these things are happening right now. And we could go into Israel-Palestine, but we'll be here in an hour and a half. But I mean, I was there. Everything I saw was not, I was in the West Bank as well. It was not at all as it's portrayed Western
Yeah.
media.
And funnily enough, I also have a friend who is on the pro-Palestinian side of the aisle who was in the West Bank for a summer, and she also says that it's not how it's being portrayed in the media. Like, I think that when it comes to war, conflict, genocide, ethnic cleansing, however you want to describe it, the way that media reports is like never particularly reliable, and we should always call into question certain things that we hear. Like, and that's probably something that even though we sit on opposite sides of this, we can agree on. I think the point that I overall wanted to express was that there are explanations but not excuses as to why Jewish people are individually targeted. I would never condone individually targeting someone on the basis of their ethnicity because of the actions of a foreign government. I do want to put that out there.
I understand that, and for that reason, will not misconstrue that in the
Yeah.
trailer.
Yeah.
But I mean, the argument against that would just be that there's been Jew hate since way before Israel existed.
That's also true.
Particularly in the Middle East, particularly among Muslims who expelled them all from their countries. So, and as I say, Mein Kampf, there was a mufti who was big with Hitler and spread a lot of that around the Middle East. If you look into it, that Jew hate goes deep in the Middle East in Islam. It is it is part of Islam. It is in their texts, as we were talking about before. So I personally, I don't think it's about Israel. I think Israel was an excuse to, and as I said, every Muslim I know grew up hearing the most horrible things about, eating children and blood and all of these kinds of things.
Yeah.
That, it's nothing to do with Israel. But if you hear those things growing up, and then you hear that one of the many, many Muslim conflicts in the world involves the Jews, then of course you're going to be up in arms. And that's the reason no one cares about Sudan. No one cares about any of the other countries where crazy things are happening right now, Syria. But there's one that's tiny, involves Jews.
I don't describe it as tiny. I think
the country itself is tiny that they're fighting over. And in Sudan,
it has the highest number of child amputees in the world.
Sudan has already surpassed, just in the last few months, has surpassed the total number of casualties in Palestine. So
I think
there's a double standard.
Sudan also is something that I'm reading about and eventually will speak out about. I've followed what's been happening for a short amount of time. This is one of the things which is it's so difficult to speak about conflicts or wars or genocides, etc. Like, I really don't want to get caught up in the weeds with the language. I think then we'd be having a discussion that I think is less important than the reality of what's going on, which is atrocious. And Sudan is. I remember seeing the pictures of, and this it's like I was saying earlier, I'm really sensitive to violence. There was an aerial shot of what the ground looked like after I think 2,000 people were massacred, and you can see the blood soaking the soil from space.
That's horrible. And not to mention the Christians being massacred in Nigeria.
Yeah. I don't want to be presumptuous, but about what's going on in Nigeria either. I know basically the order in which I know things about what's occurring is probably Israel, Palestine, and then Sudan, and then Nigeria.
So that's what I think. I'd love to have you back on and we can talk. This is like the longest episode we've done. It's an hour and a half.
Is it really?
Yeah, because it's just great talking.
I go on.
It's great. No, you don't. I go on. It's great talking to you, but I want when you come back in. I don't know. I want if any progressives are watching, I want them to look at, and they'll say, oh, because we support Israel or something. That's why, because Britain. If you look at the hatred on the streets, you look at the way people are emotional. It's not about who Britain support. And the idea then would be like, okay, so if Britain didn't support Israel in some way, you'd just forget. Like, there wouldn't be protests and street marches and all the. I don't believe that for a second. Israel is top because Jews are involved in it. There are so many conflicts going on in the world right now. They almost all involve Islam, and eventually, this is what I see on the left: is this failure to acknowledge that cultures are different, and that is the crux of the argument right now between right and left. And it's something we're not able to say on TV. And Tommy Robinson will say it, and Nigel Farage will just about kind of say it.
I guess in terms of concluding remarks, I might say you've asked me to look into the effect of Islam on the hatred of Jews and the way that Muslims view Jewish people largely, and it's something that I'll look into. I would similarly ask you, I don't know if you already have, to look into the endemic way in which the far right villainizes and demonizes Jewish people, especially right now, especially following Charlie's assassination.
We talk about that all the time. I agree with you. I agree. And look, there's loads of things you and I definitely agree on. We didn't talk about that too much today because what's the point? But we could talk afterwards, and I'm sure we would agree on, as I say, many aspects of feminism and individual liberty and religion and the issues thereof. So I think we do agree on, and the far right. Bloody hell! My argument about Tommy Robinson wasn't, his far right stuff is acceptable. It's he's not one of them. Certainly not a Groyper.
Oh, he's not a Groyper.
no.
No, he's pro-Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I would say look into what he's actually said. But yeah, I will continue, as you say. I will. You know, it's really worrying. It's really worrying. The Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens stuff. But look, even before she went on about the Jews, I'm listening to her talk about Brigitte Macron being a man. The moon landing stuff. I'm not.
She doesn't think dinosaurs are real. I don't think we should.
No, yeah, I can't. And yet she's so smart, and that's I'm so interested in that. That kind of, someone could be that I mean, look, I used to do a lot on cults, and I used to look into like Scientology, and the kinds of people who fall into cults are often so smart as well. And then they'll talk about the galactic warlord, Lord Xenu, and this mad stuff. And it's just amazing. Candace is like smart. She's super quick, super fast. I mean, that's how she made her empire. You can't just be a nutter. There are plenty of nutters, but yeah, and that's what makes it so scary.
Yeah,
so,
exactly. Yeah.
Where can people? I've got another question for you. Where can people find you and follow you? And I hope people do as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I do hope that people give me grace with the episode, because I've never spoken much about culture war things before. There are things about domestic politics that I'm not caught up on, like Tommy Robinson. The last I knew of him was the EDL, and a scroll through his Twitter. So if there are facts I've got wrong, I really do hope people hold some space for it and give me some grace. I know they won't, but I'm putting it out there.
It's the 1% most vocal. Oh, can people put in the comments, actually, people who are like, hey, Tilly was, because I know there are some of you listening, but you never comment, because 99% of people, they're not commenting on YouTube. Yeah. So if you do, just this is the one time, go and put a thing in and just go, hey, how nice to have somebody who's willing to have this conversation and did it so smartly as well. But go on, sorry.
Yeah, and I guess, there are other things that I have never much thought about, like the interaction between Islam as a religion and Jewishness. I've never much thought about it. And so it's interesting to get the perspective of a Jewish person on it. Where people can find me, I'm on Instagram. Tilly with loads of L's. You'll probably find it. It's like my old personal Instagram that I just kept the username of, and
we'll put a link.
Yeah, and I'm on TikTok under Blonde Praxis as well. And I have a YouTube channel under the same handle that should be getting going soon. We'll
put all of those below. Who is a heretic you admire?
My mum.
Okay, go on.
I guess some people might expect me to say something a bit more academic, but my mum, she moved out of a town with some really quite narrow belief systems where there was not much room for questioning, where the lives that people live seemed to be considered set in stone. And she took a huge risk. She moved away and she raised me, and I'm now in Cambridge University, and I really do credit her for so much of it. So, yeah.
I think you're a credit to her. So
she hates when people say that.
Really? Why?
Yeah. She likes it that she wants to, she always says that I'm a credit to my own self, and she doesn't take that much credit for how.
She's too modest.
Yeah, I think she is. I really think she is.
She sounds great though, and that's a great heretic. Yeah. People, Tilly Middlehurst, please go follow her. We're going to put the things down below. She's been absolutely brilliant. I want to get her back on. We should chat and stuff and keep talking about these things. How nice to have a thing we can all talk. Just talk. Everyone talk. Keep in that spirit. Comment loads. If you don't usually comment, but you've got something positive to say, please do it down below, or maybe put positive and negative, some constructive stuff. Let's be really constructive and nice about this, and show Tilly that we can have a kind of centre right who are not, we're nice, normal people, like the ones of you who come up to me on the street and say hello and all those kinds of things. That's what I want to see in the comments today. We will be looking. Hit that like button and keep watching this show.